solving by advanced and special factoring. Okay, so now we're putting everything together from tasks 1 through 3, but we're just adding the extra step of solving. So basically there's going to be an equal 0 at the end of all of our problems. And it kind of looks like a surprised smiley face, right? So that's how I remember this. Okay, example 1. 3x squared minus 6x minus 9 equals 0. So our first step is to factor the equation to its fullest potential. And we're going to be using the methods from tasks 1 through 3. Okay? So we want to look for something in this one that they all have in common. Okay, and you might notice that they all have 3 in common. So we're going to put that on the outside. And now we're doing reverse distributive. So 3 times what gives us 3x squared? Well, x squared. 3 times what gives us negative 6x? Negative 2x. And finally, 3 times what gives us negative 9? Negative 3. Remember the equal 0 is still there, the surprise smiley face. And now you might notice, hey, we can do diamond with these guys, right? So let's do that. So we're going to draw our diamond. We have a negative 3 up top. We have a negative 2 on the bottom. And our 2 puzzle pieces are going to be negative 3 and 1. So now let's write it out over here. So we're going to have 3 times x minus 3. Remember, I'm getting that from the diamond here. And then x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, now step 2 is we want to use the zero product property to set each part equal to 0 and to solve. Okay? Now, since 3 is just hanging out there, what we can do is we can divide both sides by 3 first to kind of get rid of that. Okay? And now we just have x minus 3 times x plus 1 equals 0. And remember, you want to find each part. They're going to be in the parentheses. So x minus 3, that's one of the parts. X plus 1, that's another. And we're going to separately set them equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0. X plus 1 equals 0. And then we're going to solve. So over here on the left side, we're going to do plus 3 to both sides. We get x equals 3. That's one of our answers. Then over here on the right side, we're going to do minus 1 to both sides. They cancel. We get x equals negative 1. That's our second answer. So again, we're doing the same thing. We're just adding this extra step where we're going to have x equals something at the end of our problem. Let's try another one here. Okay, so for this one, we want to do the reverse distributive property. Okay, so what do 3x squared and 12x both have in common? Well, they both have a 3 as well as an x. Okay, we start our parentheses. 3x times what gives us 3x squared? Well, just an x. And then similarly, 3x times what gives us 12x? Well, a positive 4. Okay. Now we're in a place to do the zero product property. So we're going to set each part equal to 0. 3x being one of those parts, x plus 4 being the other. So over here on the left, we're going to write 3x equals 0. And over here on the right, we're going to write x plus 4 equals 0. And we're going to solve in both situations. So we want to divide by 3. We get x equals 0. That's one answer. Over here, we're going to subtract 4. We get x equals negative 4. Easy as that. All right. So on this one, again, we want to look for a greatest common factor to pull out. What do they all have in common? And you might notice they all have 3 in common. What else, though? They all have at least one x, right? So we're going to also throw an x out there. Now we're going to put a parentheses. 3x times what gives us 3x to the third? Well, that needs to be an x squared. 3x times what gives us 15x squared? It's going to be plus 5x. Then lastly, 3x times what gives us 12x? It's going to be a plus 4. Now, are we done at this point? Not quite. We can still do diamond here, right? So let's draw our diamond over here. 4 goes on top, 5 on the bottom. Our 2 puzzle pieces are going to be 1 and 4. So now let's write it out in factored form. X plus 1, x plus 4 equal to 0. And now we can use our zero product property, right? Now notice in this problem, we have 3 parts that all have x's. So we're going to get 3 answers. What are those 3 parts? Here's one of them, 3x equals 0. Here's another, x plus 1 equal to 0. And lastly, we have x plus 4 equal to 0. So we're just going to separately solve these 3 guys. So over here on the left, we're going to divide by 3. We get x equals 0. That's one answer. Over here, take away 1 from both sides. We get x equals -1. And finally, over here, we're going to subtract 4 from both sides. And we get x equals -4. And that's how we do it. One more problem. So another thing to keep in mind, remember before we can solve, we need to see the surprise smiley face. We need the equation to equal 0, okay? So if we draw a line, we can see the equation doesn't equal 0. It equals -49. How can we get it to equal 0? Well, we can just add 49 to both sides, right? And move it to the left side. Okay? So then on the left side, we're going to have x squared minus 14x plus 49 equals, well, they cancel over here, we get 0. Now we're good to go. Now we see the surprise smiley face, and we can continue on. So for this one, you can use our perfect square trinomial shortcut from task 3. So remember, for that one, we take the square root of this number. We take the square root of this number. And we get x, and the square root of 49 is 7. And then we bring them into the equation, x and 7. And how do we tell if it's plus or minus? That's this number, whatever this sign is here. So it's going to be a minus. And you always have to square this for this shortcut. Now, this doesn't look quite like the problems that we were doing before. We don't have 2 parts to set equal to 0. But we can write it so there are 2 parts. And how we're going to do that is, isn't something squared just writing the same thing twice, multiplying it twice? So I'm just going to write x minus 7 times x minus 7 equals 0. And that's the same thing as x minus 7 squared. Now from here we can do the zero product property, right? So we're going to separate these 2 parts. X minus 7 equals 0. X minus 7 equals 0. And we're going to solve. We're going to add 7 to both sides. So I get x equals 7. Add 7 both sides here. X equals 7. So our final answer is just x equals 7.